Ulfric Stormcloak. Some here in Helgen call you a hero, but a hero doesn't use a power like the voice to murder his king and usurp his throne. You started this war, plunged Skyrim into chaos, and now the Empire is going to put you down.
So in today's video, I'm going to be steel manning the Imperial position. In other words, this video is meant to convince you that Emperor Mead was correct. I will be purposefully leaving out arguments to the contrary. If you disagree, understand that I'm not saying the Empire is objectively correct. I have also made a video, steel manning the Stormcloak position. I will be making one more video where I make the call on the objectively correct answer. This is not that video. I'm doing this because I really wanted to get a full picture of the civil war in Skyrim, and the only way to really debate for or against any position you have is to not only understand your own position, but also the opposite. And that's why today we're exploring the 11 reasons to choose the Empire in the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Reason number 1. Ulfric is a terrible leader. Let's say you agree with the idea that Skyrim should be free. The main problem now is how are they going to bridge the gap from a colony that is dependent on the Empire for at least some of its goods to a country that is capable of living entirely on their own. Even if the Nords are meant to be free, they won't thank anyone for the freedom if they just starve to death inside their houses. I think the evidence is pretty clear for the player that this is exactly what would happen to Skyrim if Ulfric gets his way and became the High King of Skyrim. Let's take a leisurely stroll around Windhelm, with Ulfric as Jarl, shall we? There is of course the obvious. The event that occurs right as you enter, with the drunk and homeless guy harassing the dunmer woman about her living in the city, and the dunmer's refusal to fight in the civil war. As I said in the reasons to join Ulfric video, the issue here is not what everyone seems to take from it. The problem is not that the people's racism should be extended to represent Ulfric's racism. Instead, the problem you should take away from this is that there is a strong, loud, and robust homeless population in Windhelm. In fact, besides Markarth, which has a dedicated slum to encourage workers to work for almost no pay, Windhelm has the largest and most visible homeless population. Besides the 3 literal beggars in the city, there is an orphan left in the street to sell flowers to feed herself, and even a few drunks who contribute nothing. Surely, Jarl Ulfric could find a way to make these people's lives better, even if it was just finding them a job for the sake of the war effort. However, that might not even be good for them. Consider that Ulfric's steward doesn't even have a bed. Even when you work in Ulfric City, your living conditions are pretty bad. This is such a crazy problem, there's absolutely no way this was an accident. Imagine living in a palace and you have to sleep in a bag on the ground. Finding this man a bed would be as easy as sending any servant, including the steward himself, to go and buy one. The fact that Ulfric has not done this shows either he really doesn't notice other people's problems, or he genuinely can't find 100 gold to throw together. Not sure which is worse. Let's zoom out just a little further. What else is going on in Windhelm? Well, there's a known serial killer striking random people in the city. The solution? Literally nothing. Don't double the guards, don't bring in some soldiers, just hope it figures itself out. Without the Dragonborns' intervention, this would theoretically continue on until everyone in the city was dead.
Susanna's the third. It's always the same. Young girl, killed at night, body torn up.
The guards are not equipped to solve it, and there is no will from Ulfric or other leadership to do anything else. So the people of Windhelm will just need to stay inside and lock their doors at night. Hey, maybe that's actually just Ulfric's solution to the high homeless population in the city. Just let them all die. Then of course there's the Arentino boy. This one's a real mess. Let's start out at the beginning. Aventis is fatherless but lived with his mom until she died of sickness.
She got sick last winter when the snows came, and she never got better.
Then Ulfric himself was just involved enough to notice and send a notice to the kid that he had to go and stay at an orphanage.
So now I'm all alone, and the Jarl said I have to go in an honor hall orphanage. It's not fair!
It's absolutely nuts that this is the solution. Aventus could have easily been given a ward status to any of the families in Windhelm. If all else failed, Ulfric could have given him a place at the Palace of Kings. And if that went wrong, I guess he could always sell flowers on the streets, because apparently that's an acceptable life for a child. Instead, he's shipped off to a different hold by the guards of Windhelm. This would be like sending an orphan to a different state, because your state apparently has no solution for them. I don't think we can blame Ulfric for not knowing about the horrible state of the orphanage in Riften. but we can blame him for what happens afterwards. Aventus escaped, somehow made his way back to Windhelm, and started performing the Black Sacrament. Now, the real nail in the coffin here is that everyone in the city, including guards, seem to know that this is going on.
Then it's true, what everyone is saying. That Aventis Arentino is doing the Black Sacrament, trying to summon the Dark Brotherhood?
It's no secret the Arentino boy is doing some ritual, trying to call the Dark Brotherhood. But who's going to stop him? Me? I'll have no part of that.
Yes, it is quite sad. A young boy, Aventis Arentino, lost his mother recently and was sent to an orphanage. But he has returned home, and people have heard strange chanting. They say it's the Black Sacrament, the ritual to contact the Dark Brotherhood.
Just to recap, Ulfric said, "Officially, I cannot allow an unwatched child to live in my city." Then the kid moves back into his own house, and Ulfric's own guards knew about it. He then begins praying to a demon, or whatever the hell it is that Sithis is, to kill someone. And everyone just looks the other way. Once again, in my opinion, this cannot be an oversight. I think we are supposed to realize that Ulfric does not care enough to solve his own city's problems. Another problem is the fact that the same guy from earlier, Rolf, can actually be found in the middle of the night wandering around the Grey Quarter shouting racist things at the dunmer living there. I want to be clear, having a racist veteran in your city is not a crime, and I still don't think it necessarily makes Ulfric racist, but it does make him incompetent. You want to know how to tell if you live in a safe city? Try what you see here. Go out between midnight and 4 a.m. like Rolf here and just start screaming racist things. If the police show up because you're breaking the law, well, you live in a community that cares about its image. If no one shows up, it's safe to assume that you live in an underfunded, possibly unsafe city that does not care about policing its citizens.
Disrespect the law and you disrespect me. You like living in this filthy slum, dark elves? Maybe you should go back to Morrowind where you belong! No lollygagging.
Windhelm is clearly the latter. Now look, there's honestly way more we could get into, but I think I've done enough to illustrate what Bethesda was trying to show you. Namely, Ulfric is a bad leader. His city is arguably the worst managed in the entire game. And it would be easy to say, well, they're fighting a war, so maybe he just can't chase down all the problems right now. Except, he was the Jarl for 18 years before this. Many of the problems demonstrated here go much longer and much deeper than the year the war has been going on. We are supposed to see that Ulfric does not know what he is doing. When he isn't making pretty speeches or shouting young men down so he can kill them, he fails to provide even basic safety and security to the people he is in charge of. It is safe to assume that this city is what all of Skyrim would look like if Ulfric was made the High King. The separation of Skyrim from the Empire could be good for Skyrim, but under Ulfric's leadership, it would ultimately plunge Skyrim into a dark age that would take generations to recover from. Part of the reason Ulfric wants to return to the old ways of Nordic life is because he knows Nord rulers are judged on how strong they are, specifically in battle, and not how well they run the aspects of their hold. Does this stop him from pointing out those same flaws in the Imperial rulers? Of course not. But he definitely does not want anyone looking too close into his backyard either. Reason number 2. If Ulfric is the best they have, they're in trouble. One major problem with the idea that I just laid out, and the idea that the Stormcloaks can rule themselves in Skyrim, is, as I keep bringing up, Ulfric. Now let's say that you manage to make it work. Let's say the Dragonborn helps him smooth over all the details I just laid out. Okay? This old dog learns new tricks, and you make him into the leader that Skyrim needs instead of the leader he is. One thing that is extremely hard about declaring independence is you have to have something to rally behind. Countries that declare independence but have no cultural identity often collapse into infighting with groups within the country fighting each other. A Skyrim that manages to throw off Imperial occupation has a higher chance of becoming 9 separate kingdoms constantly warring and blockading and tariffing each other than it has of becoming one single nation ruled by a competent High King. And the question you need to ask is, can Ulfric be that guy? Love or hate them, Figures like Nelson Mandela, Jose de San Martin, and yes, even George Washington are often more important than the blood and fighting that they bring to their people. When the fighting stops and the swords get put down and the plows are picked up, you have to have a leader that can oversee that process. Even the most staunch Ulfric supporter, which in some ways I am, should pause when they ask themselves this question. If Ulfric thought he had wide appeal, he would just call for a moot. He has the perfect excuse. Sure, Torygg was High King, but passing the crown to Elisif without a moot would just result in another duel. This is not the stability that Skyrim needs right now. So, why not call for a moot? Because he is sure that Igmund, Siggeir, and Ravencrone will not vote for him in a moot. And he is unsure what Balgruuf will do. In other words, the war is as much to remove these Jarls from their holds as it is about throwing off imperial occupation. If Ulfric cannot inspire confidence in the Jarls who have known him for 40 years, how are things going to work when the fighting stops and 20 more years go by? How do we know that this fight will not just continue in a few years? Sure, the Empire is wrong, I'm with you, but they are stable. If your goal is less dead Nords, having a powerful empire controlling Skyrim until a better leader that you can rally behind is found, is probably the best choice for the Nords of Skyrim. If your best Jarl to replace the Empire, the closest thing you have to George Washington is Ulfric's Stormcloak, well, I wouldn't put my money on him, and you shouldn't either. Reason number 3. Ulfric could have done this diplomatically. Now, one of the more interesting aspects of Skyrim is how Ulfric manipulated Torygg into a duel.
Ulfric showed up at the Gates of Solitude requesting an audience. We thought he was here to ask Torygg to declare independence. By the time we realized Ulfric was here to challenge Torygg, it was already too late. By Nord custom, once the challenge was issued in court, Torygg had no choice but to accept. Had he not, Ulfric would have had cause to call a new moot and a new vote for High King.
All through the conflict, we see a theme of the old Nord way versus the new Imperial way. The duel serves as a catalyst of these struggles. By the old way, the High King would continue on, and their heir would take over once they are gone or abdicate the throne. However, to stop Skyrim from becoming weak, in case of a weak claim or a weak ruler, the moot can be called, and all the Jarls in Skyrim would meet and vote on who the new High King should be. However, only specific events can trigger a moot. If there is a disputed succession, a moot would be called to determine the successor of the High King position. This would prevent any situations like we see with a Cersei and her children in the Game of Thrones TV show.
Do you love your children?
With all my heart.
No more than I love mine.
And they're all Jaime's.
What's interesting is that any sitting Jarl who would theoretically have claim to the throne as High King can also challenge the sitting High King to a duel, while in a formal setting before witnesses. They would either fight, and the High King dies, which triggers a moot, or the High King would refuse to fight, which would trigger a moot. Or, of course, the High King would win, triggering the challenging Jarl to have their heir take their throne. As we all know, Torygg was in his early 20s, and Ulfric was in probably his late 40s, maybe early 50s, when High King Islaud died, and left the throne to his son. There are really so many ways this could have played out. Skyrim is absolutely full of what-if scenarios. Why didn't Torygg decline the duel if he knew that he'd lose? Why do both the Empire and the Stormcloaks refuse to allow the moot to meet? What went down is arguably the worst possible scenario for all parties involved. Ulfric walks into Solitude, was greeted as a friend, or at least as an ally. Why? Because no one would dream that Ulfric would kill Torygg. Consider that while we don't have an exact timeline, we know that Torygg was probably on the throne for a year, maybe a few. At the time of Islaud's death, Ulfric had spoken of seceding from the Empire, and it was assumed by Torygg and his council that Solitude would play a part in that plan on the side of Skyrim. So when Ulfric marched into the Blue Palace, no one thought to stop him from speaking. They could have. If they had known or even suspected that Ulfric had walked into the city that morning prepared to kill a young man he had known his entire life and had broken bread with, surely an excuse would have been made. Torygg would have become ill, or he would have needed to use his chamber pot, or someone would have refused Ulfric entry, and the events of Skyrim would have changed completely. Instead, the reality of Skyrim is that Ulfric walked right into his court and issued a formal challenge to a duel. And as a result, both Ulfric and the Empire are so unsure as to what the moot would decide that they refuse to even have one. The rest is history, but the bottom line is this: even if Skyrim should be free, and as we discussed, that's kind of a big if, would it really be preferable to be ruled by someone who kills his lifelong friends and neighbor's son in such a treacherous and low way? How would anyone get elected if this was the case? The best interpretation of events is that Ulfric might have thought that Torygg would refuse to fight him, and therefore Ulfric wouldn't have to kill him. But just as it is traditional law that any Jarl might challenge the sitting High King, it is also tradition that a refusal to fight by any Nord will bar them from Sovngarde. We can meet Torygg in Sovngarde, so we know he died a true Nord.
When Ulfric Stormcloak with savage shouts sent me here, my sole regret was fair Elisif, left forlorn and weeping. I faced him fearlessly, my fate inescapable, yet my honor is unstained. Can Ulfric say the same?
We know that heaven for Nords is real. This isn't a metaphorical place, and we find him there. In other words, the question is, would you really be willing to take a gambit on ruling your kingdom if it meant an eternity in hell? That's the choice Ulfric left the young, inexperienced ruler. Hell for eternity, or death now, leaving your young widow and province alone. Truly, what a hellish choice to have thrust upon you by a man you at least thought of as a friend. Ulfric could have spoken to Torygg. We know this because he was let in that morning. It is entirely possible that they could have worked together to peacefully declare independence. So why did that not happen? Because that is not what Ulfric wanted. He wanted to fight. He wanted to prove himself as High King. He wants to be the guy, not to be free. In the events of Skyrim, with armies marching back and forth, there is a chance an old man with no heir might prove himself to everyone beyond a reasonable disagreement, especially if he has systematically removed all other eligible Jarls from the picture. Is it any wonder that any Jarl with an heir who is halfway competent gets removed? All that are left at the time of a Stormcloak victory are the old veterans who are Ulfric's friends and buddies, and of course the Blackbriar-controlled Riften ruler. No more Balgruuf. With the war, you leave Ulfric as the clear choice when the moot does occur.
I cannot accept the mantle of High King. Not until the moot declares that title should adorn my shoulders will I accept it.
If he had worked diplomatically, surely he could have brought Torygg and Balgruuf to his side. But maybe not with him at the head. After all, they were both neutral. Markarth owes him their allegiance. But once the moot decides on a High King, it probably wouldn't have been Ulfric. I'm a certified Skyrmist for the Nords shill, but Ulfric should never have been the one whose name is on the movement. His actions are that of a snake, and he will do exactly what he needs to gain power. Reason number 4. The Thalmor are backing Ulfric. Now, I have always been in the camp that believes that while the Thalmor define Ulfric as an asset, that does not mean in any way that Ulfric is working directly for the Thalmor. He is an unknowing asset. In any discussion of Elder Scrolls lore by human beings, it must be noted that the elves want total dominion of all humans, and total supremacy of the elves. That makes it pretty hard to say anything besides asking when and where is the fight supposed to be. However, I recently took another look at the events of Skyrim, and the Thalmor do not want an end to the Civil War. So, as long as you complete the Civil War for either side, it doesn't matter. That is up to you and your sensibilities. As an American, it's always seemed obvious that colonies should throw off their imperial rulers whenever they decide it's time to do so. However, let's read the note a little closer. Not only does it identify Ulfric as an asset and state that the goal is for neither the Empire or the Stormcloaks to win, but it also has some very important details. Namely, he was only identified as an asset when they found out he was the son of the Jarl of Windhelm, and that after the war, contact was established, and he has proven his worth as an asset. The so-called Markarth incident was particularly valuable from the point of view of our strategic goals in Skyrim, although it resulted in Ulfric becoming generally uncooperative to direct contact. Now, what does that mean? At some point between the end of the Great War and the Markarth incident, contact was established by the Thalmor, meaning Ulfric was willing to listen to either a direct Thalmor agent or someone working indirectly for the Thalmor. That is until the events of the markarth incident. Now, none of this is confirmed. It is left vague on purpose. But what could have possibly have been said so that Ulfric would listen either directly or indirectly to Thalmor assets before the markarth incident and not listen to them after the markarth incident? Well, as we all know, Ulfric was asked for help with the markarth incident after it was taken over by the Forsworn.
It all started here, this rebellion. When the Empire lost the Reach during the Great War, we became desperate. We promised a group of Nord militia free worship in exchange for their help retaking the hold. Then the elves found out about it. We were forced to arrest all of them. Ulfric Stormcloak, their leader, used the whole thing as proof that the Empire had abandoned Skyrim. The rebels called it the Markarth Incident. It was the founding day for the Stormcloaks, and where this war really started.
He had his own militia, and his mastery of the Thu'um made him one of the only people in the world who could break the city without major siege engines. He was ruthless and cruel, and executed almost everyone involved. And then came his critical blunder. He asked for the city to allow Talos worship. The Jarl there agreed, only for the Empire and the Thalmor to have to get involved to put a stop to it. As a result, the Thalmor was allowed to have direct control in Skyrim to stop Talos worship, and Ulfric was put in jail. And, for whatever reason, Ulfric was no longer interested in speaking to the Thalmor directly or indirect. Now again, we don't know exactly what was happening, or what he was told, but the Thalmor contacted him and kept up communication, which caused him to go to Markarth, and then whatever happened in Markarth caused him to realize what was going on because he stopped talking. The only thing that makes sense is that in order for him to correctly realize that he was being manipulated by the Thalmor after Markarth, he would have had to have something happen at the incident that did not go according to whatever plan he had walking in there. Something about the way the event played out cued him into the fact that his friend or advisor or whoever was contacting him was lying to him. For that reason, it leads me to believe that the contact is what made him to go into Markarth. Whoever it was, they were gassing him up, telling him that Skyrim is for the Nords, and that he should get rid of the Forsworn and re-establish Talos worship. And he believed them. And once he did it, only to then have given the Thalmor the excuse to send an inquisition into Skyrim, not to mention put him in prison, he must have realized that his contact was actually a Thalmor puppet and stopped contacting them. Now that's all well and good, right? But how does that affect him going forward? I think it's safe to assume that he learned his lesson. After he got out of prison, he basically just spent a couple decades letting his hold become a trash pile. I think it was a kind of exile for him. Imagine realizing that after the Thalmor used you to conquer the Imperial City, which is what he believed, they then used you again to bring hit squads into your home country. So, he quit, as he should. He realized that his pride and his ego were being used by the Thalmor to make things worse for him. I like to imagine that he spent some time reining it all in, humbling himself, and moving on. That is, until when Islan dies. He sees his chance again. He had to know his actions weren't for Skyrim. He had to know that the Thalmor wanted someone to stir up trouble. He'd already been their tool to do that before.
But she is to observe, nothing more. We are not negotiating with her. Is that clear?
Ulfric, why so hostile? After all, it's not the Thalmor that's burning your farms and killing your sons.
She's supposed to be on our side?
You know exactly... No. Not this time.
He had to know that what was best for the Nords and what was best for Ulfric were two circles that did not cross. Yet, the opportunity was too good to pass up. The real issue is not that Ulfric is a dormant asset of the Thalmor. The real issue is that he saw that he was being manipulated by them to the detriment of the Nords and his friends in the Empire, and just decided that it didn't matter anymore. All that mattered to him was placing his name, Stormcloak, on every Nord in Skyrim, and sending them to die for his chance at glory. He knows he's an asset, but it just doesn't matter to him anymore. Reason number 5. A united front presented to the Thalmor is certainly better than two divided factions working together. Now, you all saw my video. On the one hand, I want to believe that an independent Skyrim is a strong Skyrim. But on the other hand, that's so contrary to all the evidence in the game that the idea is almost laughable. The more a city has Stormcloak involvement, the worse off it is. Markarth is actively being taken over by the Forsworn again when the Dragonborn arrives.
Would look
The reach belongs to the Forsworn!
A fight.
Enough!
Death to the Nords!
Why? Well, when Ulfric took it back over, he decided to leave King Madanak alive. Sure, he killed non-combatant citizens, including children, but he decided to leave the leader of the rebellion alive? Why? You tell me. Then we have Windhelm. I discussed the problems in detail on another point, but there's a large and growing homeless population that wanders around harassing other citizens. Not to mention the serial killer. Why is this allowed? Well, again, you tell me. Then you have Riften, where the Blackbriars rule in all but name, using a mixture of connections with the Thieves Guild and the Dark Brotherhood, threats, coercion, and bribery to stay on top. Why is this allowed? Well, you tell me. Winterhold has been sitting around completely destroyed for 80 years. It's barely even a hold. No one can live there. Why? Well, again, you tell me. The more prideful the Jarl is, the more their values align with Ulfric's Stormcloaks, the worse their hold is. I wish it wasn't that simple. I wish it wasn't true, but the evidence is just all around us. So the argument goes, once the Nords are independent, they can stand together alongside the Empire as two separate, mighty kingdoms that work together, possibly with the Red Guards, to fight the Thalmor. Except, based on how divided, prideful, and arrogant the Jarls already are, the Nords probably would never be able to unite and face the Thalmor, and certainly not anytime soon. Unfortunately, for everyone involved, the choice is really to have Nord allies that are coerced and maybe forced to stand alongside Imperial soldiers for the Empire, or to stand alone. The Nords are not reliable and cannot be counted on to do the right thing. Not right now, not with their current rulers, and they certainly can't be counted on to do that at the right time. So then the question becomes whether or not Nords need to be compelled to help. And again, on the one hand, I am a strong proponent of people having the right to rule themselves, but on the other hand, the Thalmor are an existential threat, not just an economic one. Depending on who you ask, they may be planning to destroy existence as it is known in the Elder Scrolls universe. Normally, I wouldn't be against letting the Empire fight the Thalmor on their own. After all, it's mostly the Empire's fault they exist. But if the Thalmor take out the Empire, it's not just that they will win, then fight Skyrim. It's more that they might just unmake every person who is not an elf. It's not just something you can stand on principles about. Imagine waking up in one of the many afterlives of the Elder Scrolls and realizing everyone you've ever known is dead as well. And your only defense is, well, at least I allowed them their independence. The Stormcloaks, as seen in game, can barely stand up to the Empire in their own country. Why would you believe them capable of getting their shit together enough to be able to stand up against the Aldmeri Dominion? Reason number 6. Skyrim actually benefits from the Empire. Sometimes people will say that the people of Skyrim need the Empire. This is simply untrue. The Nords have fought entire wars while they sustained themselves without any outside help for centuries, in a time when Skyrim was much colder and can basically be pictured as one giant glacier. If they could do it back then, they absolutely can do it now. That said, the supplies of an empire to her provinces would still be beneficial to Skyrim. When Balgruuf says,
"For centuries, we have benefited from the Empire's protection and prosperous trade with the South. In exchange, the people of Cyrodiil sleep peacefully, knowing their northern border is guarded by the fiercest warriors in all Tamriel."
He is speaking not just as a Nord, and not just as a Jarl considering a civil war that has shattered his people, but as the ruler, as one of the nicer holds in all of Skyrim. He's speaking as the Jarl of the largest agricultural zone in all of Skyrim. If the Empire was cut off, and the food imports from the more temperate Cyrodiil were to be cut, his hold would suddenly become even more important and profitable because it's where most of the food in Skyrim is being grown. And yet, even he knows it would not be in the Nords' best interest to do this. As a ruler, he has distinct knowledge of all the things the Empire sends to his people, and he knows exactly how hard it would be to replace those things if he had to remake them himself. Consider when he says the line that I played earlier. You can only get Balgruuf to tell you this after he chooses to join the Empire. He's the only truly neutral person in the game. He really seems to understand both sides of the conflict, and is vocal about telling everyone there is no clear winner or loser here.
If it's the war you're referring to, I'm on the side of Whiterun. No doubt General Tullius and his friends in the Empire will tell you that I owe them my loyalty, and perhaps I do. Ulfric Stormcloak would say that I owe my allegiance to the Nord people as they fight for Skyrim's independence. Perhaps this is also true. The day might come when I am forced to draw my sword for one side or the other. But that day has not come yet.
Yet, when push comes to shove, and he is forced to think of his people, he aligns with the Empire against the desires of his ancestral home, and when asked why, his only reason is, dude, we have to have the stuff the Empire trades to us. We simply cannot live without it. If this is not compelling evidence that Ulfric should reconsider his rebellion, because his people could starve to death until they could fix the infrastructure they had in ancient times, well, I don't know what is. Reason number 7. Ulfric should know he is doing exactly what Thalmor wants. He lacks the maturity to care. I talked about this in the point 2 points ago, but to bring it home, Ulfric claims to care about Talos worship, and he does make it to Sovngarde if you go there after his death. But consider that every time Talos worship is brought up, he uses it as a way to boost his own name recognition. When he insisted on making Talos worship the cost of an imperial markarth, it was so he, the bear of Markarth, could be seen as the champion of Talos in front of his men.
The White Gold Concordant, our treaty with the elves after the Great War, forbids free worship of Talos. But that's what we promised Ulfric and his men. It seems foolish looking back, but at the time we were hoping the elves wouldn't find out. So when they did find out, it was either we arrest Ulfric and the militia, or enter into yet another war with the Aldmeri Dominion. The choice was clear, and now Ulfric threatens the thinly veiled peace we sacrificed so much for.
The people of Markarth did not care. In fact, the Jarl there says that he almost felt like he was being forced into it against his better judgment. Here again, Ulfric shows his hand by accident. This man uses religion as one more tool to glorify himself. Consider that the way Ulfric learned the voice was from the most humble and devoted priests of Kinnereth anywhere, ever.
The voice was a gift of the goddess Kinnereth at the dawn of time. She gave mortals the ability to speak as dragons do. Although this gift has often been misused, the only true use of the voice is for the worship and glory of the gods.
After learning the way of the voice enough to be dangerous, he went off to war. And I don't mean a war for Skyrim and her people. Ulfric chose to volunteer to fight against the elves in the name of the Empire. Look, I get the bloodlust. As a certified elf hater, I too am in it for the love of the game. But this wasn't just some whim. He spent 10 years at High Hrothgar. He had to gain their trust. He had to convince them he wasn't the bloodthirsty monster he then became. And then, when he had what he wanted, he went to a different country to spill blood. Is it really so far a stretch that when he codified Talos worship into the Markarth deal, he was doing it not for the love of the god, but because he hates the elves? Maybe that's not such a big deal to you. After all, as I said, I too hate elves. But when Talos worship is banned, he loses nothing. In fact, just like the Thalmor, he gains ground the more controversial Talos has become. He's using the god as a club against the Empire, the same way the Thalmor is using the god as a club against the Nords. Now, this is a fantasy world. Talos isn't real, right? So why should you care? Because if a man is willing to lie about his own beliefs to make the most faithful around him do as he says, you know he is not only unfaithful, but you know he is a liar. Ulfric doesn't care if every Talos worshipper dies. He cares that his own interests get furthered. If that means stirring up anger over a ban of Talos, so be it. If that means forcing the Empire to write down that a city is allowed to worship even though Nords did not ask him to, and Markarth did not ask him to, well, so be it. And if that means telling his soldiers that they should fight for glory in this life or Sovngarde in the next until they die to make him High King, so be it. Just one more step on the path to becoming the ruler of all of Skyrim. Reason number 8. Skyrim can't even beat the Legion. So far, I've kind of made it seem like the Nords would be able to stand on their own against the Thalmor, and I really want to believe that that's true. The Nords are a mighty warrior race with a culture of, well, genociding elves specifically. However, this is not as self-evident as the Nords of Skyrim would like it to seem. We roll our ass into Skyrim on what could be considered the beginning of the end of the rebellion. I mean, this is hardly a secret, but without the interference of Alduin, the Dragonborn and Ulfric would meet their end in Helgen at the beginning of Skyrim. The events preceding the events of Skyrim are basically that Ulfric made a militia, killed Torygg, and then moved freely around Skyrim, only for Tullius to arrive with his legion, and then after just a few months, Ulfric is in a cart rolling towards the headsman's axe. By all laws of war and sense, this was nothing more than a blip on the radar. The Nords cannot stand before the might of the Empire, and this isn't an empire at the height of its power. This is an empire at its lowest point. It only took a couple months of warfare to bring the Nords to the end of their rebellion. This idea that the Nords are somehow going to do anything on their own against the Thalmor is at least somewhat undercut by their performance in the war. I guess we could summarize this point like this. Without the Dragonborn, the Empire swallows Skyrim whole, Ulfric's rebellion is put down, and the order is restored. If we are arguing for the rights of the Nords to declare their independence, that's one thing. But if we are arguing for how to raise the might required to fight the elves, well, an independent Skyrim under Ulfric Stormcloak is already dead when the game starts. Not exactly a resounding recommendation for how to beat the elves. Reason number 9. Ulfric does not care about Nord customs. Now, I made this argument last week in my video about why you shouldn't choose the Empire. I believe the propaganda that Skyrim is for the Nords, okay? The argument basically goes, the Empire wants to erase Nord laws and customs and trade them for the Imperial equivalent. And to be honest, it's compelling. Ulfric presents himself as the cure to this sickness, this rot of Nordic culture. But this is far from the truth. Ulfric uses his knowledge of Nord laws to propel himself instead of a way to protect its customs themselves. There are numerous examples of this in the game, but we'll only talk about a few. First, according to Nord law, when a High King succession is contested, as is the case of passing Skyrim from Torygg to Elisif, the moot is to immediately meet and choose a new High King. Why hasn't this occurred? Well, sure, the Empire wants to make sure they know where the votes are going to go before the moot happens. But is Ulfric out here calling for a moot out of respect for Nord law? No, he wants to make sure the vote will go his way before all that. With Falkreath going to Sidgeir and Whiterun going neutral, he isn't sure who would win. Suddenly, the Nord custom of a moot is less important than fighting the Empire. That's right. He's so quick to justify killing a young man who was his friend in the name of a Nordic ancient law, but that same law becomes less important when it's his decision. How about religion? I mean, this whole thing is over Talos worship, right? But who did the Nords worship before Talos? Who is their ancient god? Well, when they die, they go to Talos land, don't they? No, they go to Sovngarde, the realm of Shor. And Shor's warrior wife is none other than Kyne. Kyne was worshipped because she gave the Nords the Thu'um in the first place, which is what allowed them to fight Alduin originally. Not only is she the god of the sky, but without this gift, the Nords would all be dead, having never had a weapon to fight back against the dragons. And Ulfric just loves and respects the god so much, right? I mean, it's not like it's an explicit violation of Kyne's teachings to use the Thu'um to kill a king in a duel, right?
He was a great war leader of the ancient Nords, a master of the voice, or tongue. After the disaster at Red Mountain, where the Nord army was annihilated, he spent many years pondering the meaning of that terrible defeat. He finally came to realize that the gods had punished the Nords for their arrogant and blasphemous misuse of the voice. He was the first to understand that the voice should be used solely for the glory and worship of the gods, not the glory of men. Jurgen Windcaller's mastery of the voice eventually overcame all opposition, and the way of the voice was born.
He didn't join the Greybeards under false pretenses only to use their teachings to bring a war of death on other people. That would be crazy, right? To do that would prove that, well, he's a blasphemer. I mean, it would be like denying the very gods you say you started this war over. That would be crazy if that's what happened. And those are just 2 examples. Ulfric simply does not follow the teachings of the Nords. He doesn't care about them unless they're propelling him towards becoming High King. Reason number 10. It's now or never. On the one hand, I am a firm supporter of independence, and I do not think it should be join under Imperial command or face them as an enemy. But on the other hand, the argument that we have to face the Thalmor as soon as possible, and now is not the time for a civil war, also holds water. Here's the truth. Right now, Skyrim has very little to worry about. The only reason the Thalmor is a problem for them is because the elves are allowed to freely cross through Cyrodiil and enter their lands as agents of the Empire. This is why the Nords are rebelling. If they break from the Empire, the Thalmor will have a much harder time harassing Skyrim and her people. That is, unless the Empire falls. I do think it is a poor argument to essentially say, I need your troops, so you should give them to me, or I will die. But what if we thought of Cyrodiil not as a country or an empire, but we thought of Cyrodiil as a wall that protects Skyrim? If you had a wall and behind it was, let's say, a storm that would cause a flood and swallow an entire city, it might make sense to send your best to fix it when the cracks form. The truth is, if the Nords do not back the Empire with their warriors and resources now, the wall that protects them from the Aldmeri Dominion might just go away for good. I do think the Nords can face the Thalmor on their own. But this is like saying a city could probably survive a flood, so there's no sense investing in the dam that protects it from the river. Just because you can survive overall doesn't mean you shouldn't avoid death and destruction if you can. The Empire is the dam holding back the elves, and right now they're in need of repair and investment. Skyrim could leave it, and they might be fine on a long enough timeline, but the prudent, far-reaching answer is to help the Empire and by extension protect themselves. It's not just a question of helping allies. It's not a question of right and wrong. The selfish, yet self-preserving answer here is to help the Empire today so they don't have to face the flood that's coming on their doorstep in the future. Reason number 11. Let's just finish off the Ulfric problem. What happens after Ulfric dies? The last reason Ulfric is a soft choice is he's a little old and there's no plan after he leaves. The hard part of a rebellion is not the rebellion itself. Killing enough of your enemy until they capitulate and give in to your demands is, ironically, the easy part of the plan. The hard part doesn't even begin after that. There is usually so much goodwill for the beloved leader of the rebellion that the people don't notice that things are often much worse after the rebellion for the average Joe. This is life after the Civil War quest in the game. The hard part comes after that. Who picks up the crown at this point is when things typically start to fall apart. Ulfric does not have a child, and at his age with his bachelor status, he's unlikely to have one when it matters. The question of who will lead us to glory or Sovngarde against the elves is certainly one that should be on everyone's mind, and yet there's no answer. Of all the Jarls that are left in the event of a total Stormcloak victory, only Sori of Morthal, Layla of Riften, and Skald of Dawnstar have heirs at all who are their own children. The rest of the 6 holds are going to have indirect claims to their thrones in their holds. Pretending that these new Jarls, who are like the cousin or nephew of the previous rulers, are just going to line up nicely and vote someone in using a moot is pretty silly. One thing Ulfric needs to provide is a strong line of succession, not only for the current Nords who rally behind him, but for the Nords in the future to rally behind. Then, when the hero leader who freed Skyrim from the Empire is gone, and he leaves no heir to the newly freed Skyrim, we have to ask what's going to happen. What I see happening is the heirs of Morthal, Dawnstar, and Riften run for the moot, along with many of the new Jarls from the other holds with ambition. However, with no clear name recognition, no clear winner, each one will have to find a way to prove themselves. And how will they do that? Well, maybe they'll just go to war with the Aldmeri Dominion, and whoever gets enough kills to their name or proves themselves in battle wins the moot. Maybe it goes nicely like that. Or maybe they don't do any of that. Maybe they fight against each other to gain favor with the other Jarls who support them. Maybe there's a series of underhanded deals and assassinations until no one's left. Maybe they put each other to the sword, just like Ulfric is doing right now. If you asked me, a Nord of Skyrim, to bet on what the best future for Skyrim would be, I would bet on one that is free from the Empire, but not one with Ulfric as High King. And if you forced me to choose between Ulfric and the Empire, well, one is just too unstable. I would wait under Imperial rule and wait until another leader identified themselves. Ulfric's Skyrim dies with him, whenever that occurs.
And there it is, friends. The ugly
11 reasons you should pick the Empire over the Stormcloaks. I know the Stormcloaks are almost the canonical choice, even though the Empire is more popular. And believe me, this video hurt for me to make as a former Stormcloak supporter. But what did I miss on this list? After 2 more weeks of playing and replaying and searching online and researching the game's guides, well, here again, I don't feel like this video was necessarily ready, but I just had to put it out. If I missed anything, please put it in the comments below. And what do you think the real, true answer is for the Skyrim Civil War? And I'll let you know my thoughts in the next video.
To help you remain tranquil in the face of almost certain death, smooth jazz will be deployed in 3, 2, 1.
I make Bethesda content, Elder Scrolls, but mostly Fallout. If you don't want to miss my character breakdowns, game reviews, or quest recaps, please subscribe. And until next time, I'll see you around.